Sometimes, life's most profound lessons come from the simplest acts of kindness. In today's story, we explore how one woman's decision to help a stranger led her down a path she never could have imagined, a journey filled with unexpected twists, heartbreak, and ultimately, redemption. This is a story of courage, compassion, and the unshakable belief that doing what is right will always find a way to make a difference, even when the world seems to punish you for it. Elizabeth, a hard-working single mother, found herself at a crossroads after helping a stranger in need. What she thought was a small gesture turned her world upside down, pushing her to the brink of despair before a miraculous twist of fate changed everything. If you've ever doubted the power of a kind heart, or wondered if doing good in a cynical world is worth it, this story will remind you that sometimes the greatest rewards come from taking a risk for others. As you listen, reflect on how empathy and compassion have shaped your life, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a ripple of positivity together. Comment below with a phrase that inspires you to spread kindness. Perhaps something like, "I choose compassion every day," or "My actions create a kinder world." We'd love to hear from you. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join a community that believes in the power of goodness. Your subscription ensures more stories like this reach those who need them most. Now let's dive into the story of Elizabeth, a woman whose kindness changed not only her life but an entire community. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at the bustling diner where Elizabeth worked. The hum of conversations, the clatter of dishes, and the rhythmic swish of the kitchen door created a symphony of daily routine. For Elizabeth, this was life simple but steady. As a cashier, she wasn't paid much, but it was enough to keep the lights on and put food on the table for her and her young daughter. That day, however, would be anything but ordinary. The lunch rush had ended, leaving a brief lull in the day's chaos. Elizabeth took this time to wipe down the counters and organize the receipts near the register. She had always been meticulous, valuing order and finding small comfort in her ability to maintain it amidst life's unpredictability. Yet, even in her focus, she couldn't ignore the presence of an elderly man standing hesitantly near the counter. His appearance was unremarkable to most worn shoes, a coat slightly too big for his frame, but to Elizabeth, there was something strikingly familiar about him. Maybe it was the way he clutched the menu, as if seeking permission to dream of something better, or the tired look in his eyes that told a story of years of struggles. She couldn't quite place it, but something about him tugged at her heart. He seemed lost in thought, searching through his pockets with a furrowed brow. Elizabeth knew that look all too well, the quiet panic of someone trying to stretch a dollar further than it could go. Her instincts told her that he wasn't just deciding between options. He was trying to make an impossible choice. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" she asked, her tone gentle and unassuming, careful not to startle him. The man looked up, startled by her kindness. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and almost apologetic. "I just wanted to get a sandwich," he said, holding up a crumpled bill and a handful of coins, "but I think I'm short." In that moment, time seemed to pause for Elizabeth. She thought of her late father, a kind man who had worked tirelessly to provide for their family. She remembered how, in his final years, his pride often kept him from asking for help even when he needed it most. The memory hit her like a wave, and she couldn't bear the thought of turning this man away. Without hesitation, Elizabeth reached into the pocket of her apron, pulling out a few bills she had earned in tips that day. She placed the money on the counter and smiled. "Don't worry about it," she said. "This one's on me." The elderly man stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to say, as if kindness was a language he hadn't spoken in years. Finally, his lips trembled into a smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You don't know what this means to me." Elizabeth waved it off lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Enjoy your meal," she replied, watching as he shuffled to a table and carefully unwrapped his sandwich. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, as though it was the first warm meal he'd had in days. To Elizabeth, It was a small gesture, barely worth a second thought. She believed in helping where she could, no matter how insignificant it seemed. In her mind, everyone deserved kindness, especially in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. But what Elizabeth didn't realize was that this seemingly small act of generosity had set something much larger into motion. As she continued her shift, the man finished his meal, quietly left the diner, and disappeared into the crowd. She didn't think she'd ever see him again, nor did she expect that her decision to help him would have any consequences beyond making his day a little brighter. Later that evening, as she reflected on the day, Elizabeth felt a quiet sense of contentment. Despite her own struggles, she had made someone's life a little easier. It wasn't much, but it was enough. What she didn't know was that this small moment of compassion would soon come back to her in ways she could never have imagined. Elizabeth's simple act of kindness raises a question for all of us. How often do we see someone in need and hesitate to act? Perhaps it's out of fear of overstepping, or a belief that our help won't make a difference. Yet, as Elizabeth's story reminds us, the ripple effects of one small action can extend far beyond what we see. Kindness, after all, is a universal language. It transcends barriers of age, culture, and circumstance, reaching places we cannot. It is a reminder that no matter how insignificant we may feel in the grand scheme of things, our actions have the power to transform lives, sometimes in ways we never anticipate. As the diner began to close for the evening, Elizabeth tidied up her station, unaware of what awaited her in the coming days. For her, the day had been like any other, punctuated only by the satisfaction of doing what felt right. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. What Elizabeth couldn't know was that her simple gesture of kindness was about to turn her world upside down. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll explore the unexpected consequences of her decision and how doing the right thing isn't always easy. Elizabeth's day had ended like any other, or so she thought. Little did she know, the events of that seemingly ordinary shift were about to unfold in ways she couldn't have imagined. The following morning, the diner buzzed with its usual energy, early risers stopping by for coffee, families grabbing breakfast before school, and regulars exchanging small talk over their pancakes. Elizabeth moved through her tasks with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But by mid-morning, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Her manager, Mr. Davis, a stern but fair man in his 40s, stepped out of his office with a grim expression. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Elizabeth. "Elizabeth," he called out, his voice unusually firm. "Can I see you in my office?" Her stomach dropped. In her experience, these words rarely preceded good news. She quickly replayed the previous day in her mind, searching for any mistakes she might have made. Unable to think of anything out of the ordinary, she followed Mr. Davis into the cramped office, her heart pounding. Once inside, he shut the door and gestured for her to sit. Elizabeth perched nervously on the edge of the chair, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "Elizabeth," he began, his tone measured but cold, "it's come to my attention that you violated company policy yesterday." Confused, she tilted her head slightly. "Policy? I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, but I'm not sure what you mean." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm referring to the incident with the elderly customer. You paid for his meal out of your own pocket. While I understand your intentions, our policy is clear. Employees are not allowed to give away food under any circumstances." Elizabeth felt her cheeks flush with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "But Mr. Davis," she explained, "I didn't think of it as giving away food. I used my own money to help him. He clearly needed it, and..." He held up a hand to silence her. "I understand that you thought you were doing the right thing, but this isn't about intentions. It's about rules. If we allow exceptions, where does it end? This isn't a charity, it's a business." His words stung. Elizabeth wanted to argue, to tell him that humanity should always outweigh bureaucracy, but she could see the determination in his eyes. There was no room for debate. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "but I have no choice. I have to let you go." The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he'd just said. "You're firing me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "You've been a valuable employee, but this is a serious breach of policy. I'll make sure you get a good reference, and I'm happy to recommend you for another position elsewhere. But as of today, your employment here is terminated." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but Elizabeth refused to let them fall. She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate, as if the act of rising from the chair required all the strength she had left. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. Walking out of the office, Elizabeth felt a mix of humiliation, anger, and disbelief. How could doing something so right feel so wrong? She gathered her belongings, avoiding eye contact with her coworkers, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The reality of her situation hit her as she walked home. Without this job, how would she pay the rent, cover her daughter's school expenses, help her mother, who was already struggling with mounting medical bills? The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Elizabeth replayed the events in her mind. The injustice of it all gnawed at her. She had been punished for showing compassion, for doing what she believed was right. Was this the world she was raising her daughter to live in, a world where rules mattered more than people? But as despair began to creep in, a small voice inside her reminded her of why she had acted the way she did. It wasn't about recognition or rewards. It was about helping someone who needed it. No policy, no job could take away her belief in the power of kindness. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing: she would not let this setback define her. If the world wanted to punish her for doing good, she would find a way to turn that punishment into something meaningful. Little did she know, her journey was far from over. The seeds of kindness she had sown were already beginning to sprout in ways she couldn't yet see. In the next chapter, we'll explore the hidden struggles Elizabeth faced outside of work and how her resilience in the face of adversity became her greatest strength. Don't miss this inspiring continuation of her story. Elizabeth's world had always been one of quiet perseverance. Long before her job loss, life had tested her resolve time and again. As she walked back to her modest apartment after being fired, her thoughts turned not just to her own struggles, but to the countless sacrifices she had made for the ones she loved. This was no ordinary setback for her. It was another weight added to an already heavy load. Her apartment, though small, was meticulously kept. A collection of her daughter's artwork adorned the walls, brightening the otherwise sparse space. Her daughter Amelia, only 7 years old, was the light of her life. Amelia had inherited Elizabeth's sharp brown eyes and curious nature, always asking questions about the world and dreaming of adventures far beyond their little corner of the city. But dreams, Elizabeth knew, required a foundation, one she had worked tirelessly to provide. Her days often began before dawn and ended long after the sun had set, balancing work at the diner with nights spent reviewing bills, calculating how to stretch every dollar. Losing her job was more than just a blow to her pride. It was a direct threat to the fragile stability she had fought so hard to maintain. Elizabeth's challenges didn't end at home. Her mother, Clara, was battling a chronic illness that required regular treatments and medications. Though Clara never complained, Elizabeth saw the toll it took on her, physically, emotionally, and financially. The cost of healthcare loomed like a dark cloud over their lives, a constant reminder of how unforgiving the system could be. Elizabeth had become the anchor for her family, but at what cost to herself? As she sat down at the kitchen table that evening, surrounded by unopened envelopes marked with red stamps, Elizabeth felt a deep weariness settle over her. The kind that comes not from a single day's events, but from years of relentless effort. She thought back to the elderly man at the diner, and for a fleeting moment, she questioned her decision to help him. Had her kindness been worth the fallout? But even as the doubt crept in, her heart pushed back. Of course it was worth it. Amelia padded into the room, her small feet barely making a sound on the worn linoleum floor. "Mommy, why are you sad?" she asked, climbing onto her lap. Elizabeth forced a smile. brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," she lied gently. "I'm just thinking about what's next for us." Amelia tilted her head, considering this. "You're strong, Mommy. You always say we can do hard things." Elizabeth hugged her tightly, holding back tears. In that moment, she realized that no matter how difficult things became, she couldn't afford to give up. Her daughter was watching her, learning from her. If Elizabeth wanted Amelia to believe in the power of resilience, she had to embody it herself. The following days were a blur of phone calls and job applications. Elizabeth scoured the classifieds, sent out resumes, and followed up on every possible lead. Each rejection stung, but she refused to let it break her spirit. She reminded herself of the values her father had instilled in her: honesty, hard work, and compassion. These were not negotiable, no matter how tempting it might be to take shortcuts. One evening, after a particularly discouraging day, Elizabeth decided to visit her mother. Clara lived in a small retirement complex on the outskirts of town. And though the building showed its age, the community there was warm and supportive. Elizabeth brought a bag of groceries with her, knowing her mother would insist she didn't need anything. "Lizzie," Clara said as Elizabeth walked in, her face lighting up despite her frailty, "you didn't have to bring all this. How are you holding up?" Elizabeth hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "I lost my job, Mom." Clara's face fell, her worry evident. "Oh, Lizzie, I'm so sorry. What happened?" Elizabeth explained the incident at the diner, recounting her decision to pay for the elderly man's meal and the fallout that followed. Clara listened intently, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When Elizabeth finished, her mother reached out and placed a hand on hers. "You did the right thing," Clara said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. Kindness is never wasted, even when it feels like it is." Those words stuck with Elizabeth as she returned home that night. They became a mantra of sorts, a reminder that her actions, however small, had meaning. And though she couldn't see it yet, her kindness had already set in motion a chain of events that would soon reshape her life. Elizabeth's story isn't unique in its challenges. Millions face similar struggles every day, working tirelessly to support their families, making impossible choices between their own needs and the needs of others, and battling a system that often feels rigged against them. Yet it is in these shared struggles that the seeds of resilience are planted. Kindness and empathy, even in the face of adversity, are acts of quiet rebellion against a world that often prioritizes profit over people. Elizabeth's journey is a testament to the idea that strength isn't just about enduring hardship. It's about staying true to one's values in the process. But this was only the beginning. As Elizabeth worked to piece her life back together, an unexpected phone call would soon change everything. What could this call mean for Elizabeth's future? Don't miss the next chapter, where her story takes a dramatic turn, proving that acts of kindness often come full circle. 2 weeks had passed since Elizabeth had been fired. Each day felt like a battle against an invisible enemy, fear of the unknown. She had always been a planner, someone who thrived on structure and stability. But now, with no job and mounting bills, the days seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with uncertainty and doubt. She had spent countless hours applying to every position she could find, from cashier jobs to administrative roles, but each rejection was another blow to her already fragile confidence. It wasn't just about the money, though that was critical. It was about her identity. Elizabeth prided herself on being dependable, on being the one her daughter and mother could count on. Without work, she felt adrift. It was during one of these long, restless afternoons that her phone rang. Elizabeth didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, hopeful that it might be a callback for one of the jobs she'd applied for. "Hello, is this Elizabeth?" A man's voice asked, polite but firm. "Yes, this is she," she replied cautiously, her heart pounding slightly. Was this good news or another dead end? "This is Mr. Harris," the voice continued. "I'm the owner of the diner franchise where you used to work." Elizabeth froze. Her mind raced. Why would the franchise owner be calling her? Had she done something wrong? Was there a complaint she hadn't heard about? She took a deep breath. "Yes, Mr. Harris. How can I help you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again, his tone softer now. "First, I want to apologize for how you were treated. I've only recently learned about the incident that led to your termination, and I wanted to hear your side of the story directly." Elizabeth's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. Gathering her composure, she recounted the events of that day, the elderly man, his struggle to pay for his meal, and her decision to step in. She explained how it felt like the only humane thing to do, even if it went against company policy. As she spoke, she could hear the emotion creeping into her voice, the frustration of losing her job for an act she believed was rooted in kindness. When she finished, there was silence on the other end. Finally, Mr. Harris spoke. "Thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth, I have to tell you something you may not know. That elderly man you helped, he's my father." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. "Your father?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said. "He didn't tell anyone at the time, but he was testing the customer service at our locations. It's something he does occasionally. He believes in seeing how our staff treat people, especially those who might seem down on their luck. When he told me about what you did, how you treated him with such dignity and compassion, he was deeply moved. So was I." Elizabeth felt a mix of emotions: relief, surprise, and a lingering sense of injustice. "But I was fired," she said, her voice tinged with frustration, "for doing what I thought was the right thing." "I know," Mr. Harris said, "and I can't undo what happened, but I can try to make it right. I want to offer you a position as the general manager of that diner. You've shown the kind of leadership and empathy that we need in this business." Elizabeth's mind reeled. A general manager? It was an opportunity far beyond what she had hoped for. But doubts crept in. Could she really take on such a role after everything that had happened? "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Say yes," Mr. Harris replied with a chuckle. "I think you're exactly what this team needs, and I'm confident you'll do great things." After a moment of silence, Elizabeth smiled through the tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she said finally. "Thank you for believing in me." When the call ended, Elizabeth sat in stunned silence, the weight of the past 2 weeks lifting ever so slightly. She had faced rejection after rejection, but now, out of the blue, came an opportunity not just to rebuild her life, but to make a real difference. That evening, as she tucked Amelia into bed, Elizabeth shared the news. "Guess what, sweetie? Mommy got a new job." Amelia's eyes lit up. "Really? Doing what?" "I'm going to be the boss at the diner," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Amelia beamed. "Does that mean you get to tell people to be nice?" Elizabeth laughed, tears threatening to spill over. "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly what it means." But Elizabeth knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Taking on a leadership role would come with its own set of challenges, and not everyone would welcome her with open arms. Still, as she lay awake that night, she felt something she hadn't in weeks: hope. In the next chapter, we'll explore Elizabeth's new role as a general manager and the resistance she faces from within her team. Stay tuned to see how she navigates this next chapter of her journey, proving that kindness and integrity are the cornerstones of true leadership. Elizabeth's first day as the general manager of the diner was a whirlwind of emotions. She walked through the glass doors with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The familiar sounds of the kitchen pans clanging, orders being called out, and the rhythmic hiss of the coffee machine welcomed her like an old friend. Yet, the weight of her new title hung heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't the same job she had left. Now, she was in charge, and that meant navigating an entirely new set of challenges. Her arrival was met with a variety of reactions from the staff. Some greeted her with cautious optimism, while others offered curt nods or avoided eye contact altogether. One employee in particular, Antonino, seemed to bristle at her presence. A senior member of the team, Antonino had worked at the diner for nearly a decade and was known for his strong opinions. He viewed Elizabeth's promotion as an affront to his tenure, believing he deserved the position more than she did. As Elizabeth made her rounds, introducing herself to those she hadn't worked with before, and reconnecting with familiar faces, she felt the undercurrent of tension. The whispers and sideways glances didn't go unnoticed, but she chose to focus on the task at hand. She had a clear vision for the diner, to create a workplace where respect and collaboration thrived, rooted in the same values that had guided her decision to help the elderly man weeks ago. Her first meeting with the staff was a pivotal moment. Standing in the small break room, Elizabeth addressed the group with a calm but confident demeanor. "I know my being here might come as a surprise to some of you," she began, her voice steady. "I understand that change can be difficult, and I respect the hard work you all put into making this diner successful. My goal isn't to come in and turn everything upside down. My goal is to work with you to create an environment where everyone feels valued and respected, our customers and each one of you." The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Elizabeth could feel the skepticism in the air, particularly from Antonino, whose arms were crossed tightly over his chest. She knew words alone wouldn't be enough to win them over. She would have to prove herself through actions. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth threw herself into her new role. She spent hours observing the daily operations, listening to her team, and identifying areas where improvements could be made. One of her first initiatives was to implement a new scheduling system that offered more flexibility, a change that many employees appreciated. She also introduced small but meaningful gestures, like a recognition board where staff achievements were celebrated. From customer compliments to behind-the-scenes teamwork, but not everyone was on board. Antonino, in particular, seemed determined to challenge her at every turn. When Elizabeth suggested streamlining the kitchen workflow to reduce wait times, he dismissed her ideas as unnecessary. During team meetings, he would interrupt or undermine her suggestions, often pointing out her lack of experience as a manager. One particularly tense moment came during a busy Saturday lunch rush. An order had been delayed, and a frustrated customer was growing increasingly vocal. Elizabeth stepped in to de-escalate the situation, apologizing sincerely and offering a discount on the customer's meal. While the customer left satisfied, Antonino confronted her afterward. "You're too soft," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "This is a business, not a charity. You can't keep giving things away every time someone complains." Elizabeth took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding. "I understand your concerns, Antonino," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I believe that treating people with kindness and respect, customers and staff alike, is what will keep them coming back. It's not just about profit, it's about building trust." Antonino scoffed but said nothing more, walking away with a shake of his head. Despite his resistance, Elizabeth remained steadfast in her approach. She knew that winning over someone like Antonino would take time, but she also knew the importance of staying true to her values. As the weeks turned into months, small changes began to take root. The staff started to notice Elizabeth's dedication, not just to the diner's success, but to their well-being. She took time to learn about their lives, offering support where she could and always keeping an open door for concerns or suggestions. Slowly but surely, the whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by a sense of cautious respect. Even Antonino, though still guarded, began to soften. One evening, after a particularly hectic shift, Elizabeth stayed late to help clean up. As she wiped down tables, she noticed Antonino watching her from across the room. After a moment, he approached her. "I still don't agree with everything you do," he admitted, his tone less confrontational than usual. "But I'll give you this, you work hard. I can respect that." Elizabeth smiled, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Thank you, Antonino. That means a lot." The moment wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. For Elizabeth, it was a reminder that leadership wasn't about immediate results. It was about consistency, patience, and the willingness to lead by example. As she locked up the diner that night, Elizabeth reflected on how far she had come. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she felt more prepared than ever to face its challenges. She knew that true leadership wasn't about wielding authority, it was about inspiring others to believe in a shared vision. In the next chapter, we'll see how Elizabeth transforms the diner's culture, proving that ethical leadership can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond the workplace. Don't miss this inspiring continuation of her story. Elizabeth stood in the center of the diner early one morning, just before opening. The faint smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the distant sound of the radio softly playing a classic tune. This quiet moment was her favorite, a time to gather her thoughts and envision the day ahead. But this day was different. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where Elizabeth would begin reshaping the diner into a place that reflected the values she held dear: respect, collaboration, and kindness. For too long, the diner had operated like many other businesses focused on efficiency and profit, often at the expense of its employees' well-being. Elizabeth had experienced this firsthand as a cashier. She remembered the rushed shifts, the lack of appreciation, and the feeling that she was just another cog in the machine. Now, as the general manager, she had the power to change that narrative. Her first priority was creating a sense of community among the staff. She started small, holding morning meetings where everyone could share their thoughts, concerns, and suggestions. At first, the idea was met with skepticism. Employees were used to being told what to do, not being asked for their input. But as Elizabeth consistently listened and implemented their ideas, whether it was adjusting the schedule to accommodate personal commitments or streamlining the kitchen layout to improve efficiency, she began to earn their trust. One of her earliest successes came from an idea proposed by Mia, a shy but talented server who rarely spoke up. During one of the meetings, Mia suggested adding a Customer of the Month program, where regular patrons could be recognized with a free meal or a small token of appreciation. Elizabeth loved the idea and immediately put it into action. The program was an instant hit, bringing a new level of warmth and connection between the staff and their customers. Building on that momentum, Elizabeth introduced a Team Spotlight initiative. Each month, an employee was celebrated for their contributions, whether it was going above and beyond during a busy shift or simply being a positive presence in the workplace. The recognition wasn't elaborate. Sometimes it was a handwritten note and a small gift card, but it made a world of difference. For many employees, it was the first time their efforts had been formally acknowledged. As morale improved, so did productivity. Customers began to notice the shift in atmosphere. The diner, once just another stop for a quick bite, became a place where people lingered, enjoying not just the food, but the sense of community that Elizabeth and her team were fostering. Reviews on social media highlighted the friendly staff and welcoming environment, bringing in new customers and boosting sales. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Resistance still lingered, particularly from those who were wary of change. Antonino, while more cooperative than before, often questioned Elizabeth's decisions, especially when they seemed to prioritize people over profits. During a staff meeting, he openly challenged her proposal to implement an anonymous feedback system, arguing that it would only invite complaints and negativity. "Why fix what isn't broken?" he said, his arms crossed defensively. "We've been doing fine without it." Elizabeth met his gaze calmly. "I understand your concern, Antonino," she said, "but I believe feedback, both positive and constructive, is essential for growth. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about giving everyone a voice and finding ways to improve together." The discussion that followed was lively, with employees voicing their support for the idea. By the end of the meeting, even Antonino had to admit it was worth a try. And when the first round of feedback came in, it revealed insights that helped address long-standing issues, from communication gaps to workflow bottlenecks. The results spoke for themselves, further validating Elizabeth's approach. One of the most profound changes came in the form of mentorship. Elizabeth made it a point to mentor younger or less experienced employees, teaching them not just the technical skills needed for their roles, but also the importance of empathy and integrity in their interactions. She often shared her own story, the struggles she faced, the values that guided her decisions, and the lessons she learned along the way. For many, her journey was a source of inspiration, a reminder that success wasn't just about climbing the ladder, but about lifting others as you go. The ripple effects of Elizabeth's leadership began to extend beyond the diner. Customers started sharing their experiences online, praising not just the food, but the kindness and professionalism of the staff. Local organizations took notice, inviting Elizabeth to speak at community events about ethical leadership and the importance of workplace culture. She accepted these opportunities humbly, always emphasizing that the credit belonged to her team. One evening, as Elizabeth locked up the diner after a particularly busy day, she found herself reflecting on how far they had come. The changes hadn't happened overnight, and there were still challenges to tackle, but the transformation was undeniable. The diner was no longer just a workplace. It was a family, bound by a shared commitment to treating each other and their customers with dignity and respect. But Elizabeth knew this was only the beginning. She had bigger dreams, ones that extended beyond the four walls of the diner. What if this culture of kindness could inspire others in the industry? What if it could spark a movement? The thought filled her with hope and determination. In the next chapter, we'll see how Elizabeth's efforts gain wider recognition, leading to opportunities she never thought possible. Her journey proves that when you lead with values, the impact can reach far beyond your own expectations. Stay tuned for this next inspiring turn in her story. Elizabeth stood at the podium, her heart pounding as she faced a crowd of over 200 people at a regional leadership summit. It was a moment she never could have envisioned just a year ago when she was a cashier struggling to keep her family afloat. Yet here she was, invited as a keynote speaker to share her story, a testament to resilience, compassion, and the power of values-driven leadership. The invitation to the summit had come unexpectedly. One day, she received an email from a prominent business association recognizing the changes she had implemented at the diner. They had heard about the restaurant's turnaround, from its improved work culture to its growing reputation in the community. Elizabeth had hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to step into such a public role. But she reminded herself of the lessons she wanted to teach her daughter. When an opportunity arises, even if it scares you, you take it. "Good evening," Elizabeth began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A year ago, I was standing behind the counter at a diner, never imagining that my story would bring me here. But today, I'm here to talk about something we all know yet often overlook, the power of kindness, not just in life, but in leadership." As she spoke, she recounted her journey with authenticity, detailing the struggles, the pivotal moment when she lost her job, and the unexpected second chance that followed. The audience listened intently as she described how she had approached her new role with humility, a willingness to learn, and an unwavering commitment to her values. "I realized early on that leadership isn't about authority," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "It's about creating an environment where people feel valued, where their voices are heard, and where they can thrive not just as employees, but as individuals." The audience erupted in applause, but Elizabeth wasn't finished. She went on to share practical strategies that others could implement in their own workplaces. She spoke about the importance of empathy in decision-making, the value of open communication, and the ripple effects of treating employees with respect. One of the anecdotes that resonated most deeply was about Antonino. Elizabeth described how his initial resistance had been one of her greatest challenges, but also one of her greatest lessons. Over time, she realized that his resistance wasn't rooted in malice, but in fear of change, fear of losing his place in a team he'd been part of for years. By taking the time to understand his perspective and address his concerns, Elizabeth had not only earned his respect, but had also gained a valuable ally. "True leadership," she said, "isn't about eliminating resistance. It's about transforming it into collaboration." The audience gave her a standing ovation as she concluded her speech. But the most meaningful moment came afterward. As she mingled with attendees, several approached her to share their own stories of struggles and triumphs, inspired by her words. Some were business leaders looking to adopt her strategies, while others were employees who saw in her story a reflection of their own experiences. The recognition didn't stop there. Following the summit, Elizabeth received offers to collaborate with other restaurants and organizations seeking to improve their workplace cultures. She even started consulting on leadership development, a role she never dreamed she would step into but embraced wholeheartedly. Each opportunity was a chance to expand the reach of her message, to show others that kindness and success were not mutually exclusive. Back at the diner, the team celebrated Elizabeth's achievements as if they were their own, and in a way, they were. The transformation of the diner had been a collective effort, driven by the shared values that Elizabeth had championed. The diner's success became a model for other businesses in the area, with neighboring restaurants asking to learn more about the changes she had implemented. But Elizabeth remained grounded. She never lost sight of the journey that had brought her here or the people who had supported her along the way. For her, every recognition, every accolade was a reminder of the elderly man at the counter that day, a simple moment of compassion that had set everything in motion. In her quieter moments, Elizabeth reflected on the lessons she had learned through it all. She realized that adversity, though painful, often holds the seeds of growth. Her firing, which had felt like the end of the world, had been the catalyst for a new beginning. It taught her that values aren't just words to live by. They're the compass that guides you through the darkest times. Her story also underscored the interconnectedness of our actions. A single act of kindness, however small, can ripple outward in ways we can't predict. It reminded her of something her father used to say: "You never know how far a good deed will travel." As Elizabeth prepared for yet another speaking engagement, she found herself thinking about the future. The diner was thriving, her consulting work was taking off, and her story was reaching more people than she ever imagined. But she knew there was still more to do. She dreamed of creating a foundation that would support employees in low-wage industries, providing resources for personal and professional growth. It was a lofty goal, but Elizabeth had learned to dream big. Her daughter, Amelia, often watched her mother with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. One evening, as Elizabeth worked on a presentation at the kitchen table, Amelia climbed into her lap and asked, "Mommy, do you think I can help people too, like you do?" Elizabeth smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Sweetheart, you already do. Every time you're kind to someone, every time you help without expecting anything in return, you're making the world a better place." Amelia nodded solemnly, as if absorbing the weight of her mother's words. And in that moment, Elizabeth knew that no matter where her journey took her next, the values she was passing on to her daughter were the greatest legacy she could ever leave. In the next chapter, we'll explore how Elizabeth's vision of kindness continues to expand, inspiring her community and beyond. Don't miss the final chapters of this incredible journey. Adversity had shaped much of Elizabeth's life, but it wasn't until she faced the fallout of losing her job that she truly understood the depth of her resilience. The journey from being terminated to rebuilding her career had been anything but straightforward. Yet, it was in those difficult moments that Elizabeth discovered the strength to not just survive, but thrive. Her story became a reminder that resilience isn't the absence of hardship, it's the ability to move forward despite it. This lesson wasn't just about enduring challenges, it was about transforming them into opportunities for growth. Elizabeth's journey had proven that setbacks could be the foundation for something greater. But this realization had come with its own share of pain and struggle. After taking on the role of general manager, Elizabeth faced pressure from all sides. From skeptical employees like Antonino to the weight of high expectations from her new employer, every day presented a test of her resolve. But Elizabeth approached each challenge with the same principles that had guided her before: compassion, integrity, and a belief that people, when treated well, could rise to meet even the toughest demands. Her ability to remain calm and composed became her greatest asset. When faced with disagreements or resistance, she listened intently, seeking to understand rather than react. This approach diffused tensions and helped her build trust among her team. Even when the path forward wasn't immediately clear, Elizabeth's determination to persevere inspired those around her to do the same. One of her most trying moments came during a staffing shortage that threatened to derail the diner's growing success. Several employees had to take unexpected leave due to personal emergencies, leaving the diner severely understaffed during its busiest period. Elizabeth rolled up her sleeves and jumped into every role greeting customers, taking orders, washing dishes, whatever was needed to keep the business running smoothly. Her willingness to step in not only kept the diner afloat, but also earned her team's respect. "Seeing you work alongside us reminded me why I joined this team in the first place," one server told her after a particularly grueling shift. "You don't just lead, you lead with us." But resilience isn't just about what happens on the outside. It's also about the inner battles we face. For Elizabeth, the quiet moments alone were often the hardest. When she sat at her kitchen table late at night, exhausted from the day's work, she sometimes wondered if it was all worth it. Could one person really make a difference? Was her approach to leadership sustainable in a world that often prioritized results over relationships? In those moments, she found solace in her family. Her daughter, Amelia, remained her anchor, constantly reminding her of the importance of staying true to her values. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Kindness is never wasted, Lizzie." And slowly but surely, she began to see the truth in that sentiment. Resilience, Elizabeth realized, wasn't about being unshaken by life's difficulties. It was about bending without breaking, about finding the strength to adapt and grow even when the odds were stacked against her. Every struggle she faced became a lesson, every setback an opportunity to learn and improve. The recognition she received at the Leadership Summit had only validated what she already knew in her heart. Her story mattered. By sharing her experiences, Elizabeth wasn't just inspiring others, she was creating a roadmap for how to lead with empathy and integrity. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being persistent, honest, and willing to learn. Her journey also sparked a broader reflection on how we define success. For Elizabeth, success was no longer about titles or accolades. It was about the impact she had on the people around her. She saw it in the way her team supported one another, in the smiles of satisfied customers, and in the sense of community that had blossomed within the diner. Elizabeth's resilience wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the power of staying true to one's values, even in the face of adversity. Her story became a source of inspiration for those who heard it, challenging them to rethink their own definitions of success and to consider how they could turn their struggles into stepping stones. But Elizabeth's journey was far from over. With every challenge she overcame, new doors opened, presenting opportunities she had never dreamed of. Her next chapter would be about expansion, not just of her career, but of the kindness and compassion that had brought her this far. In the next chapter, we'll see how Elizabeth's growing impact began to resonate within her community and beyond, proving that the ripple effects of one act of kindness can reach farther than anyone could imagine. As Elizabeth's story spread, the ripple effects of her kindness and leadership began to extend far beyond the diner. Local media picked up on the transformation of the restaurant, praising it as a shining example of what could be achieved when values were prioritized over profits. Articles called it the little diner with a big heart, and customers began traveling from neighboring towns to experience the warmth and positivity for themselves. But Elizabeth wasn't content to stop there. She had seen firsthand how small acts of kindness could transform lives, and wanted to encourage others to do the same. With the support of her team, she launched a kindness incentive program at the diner, encouraging both employees and customers to perform simple acts of generosity. The program was simple but impactful. Each week, employees would nominate a coworker who went above and beyond to help someone. Whether it was assisting a customer, covering a shift, or offering a listening ear. Customers were also invited to participate by sharing stories of kindness they had witnessed, either in the diner or in their own lives. Each month, a standout act of kindness was celebrated with a small award ceremony, drawing smiles, applause, and sometimes even tears. One particularly memorable moment came when a customer, a single mother named Jasmine, shared how one of the employees had quietly paid for her meal when she realized she had left her wallet at home. Jasmine's story resonated deeply with everyone in the room, serving as a reminder that even the smallest gestures could have a profound impact. As the program gained momentum, it began attracting attention from local organizations and businesses. Other restaurants in the area reached out to Elizabeth, asking for guidance on how to implement similar initiatives. Some even sent their staff to train at the diner, eager to learn from her team's example. But the impact didn't stop at the diner's doors. Inspired by the success of the program, Elizabeth began organizing community events that brought people together to give back. One of the first was a day of kindness where volunteers, including diner employees and customers, worked together to deliver meals to local shelters and distribute care packages to families in need. The event was a resounding success, with hundreds of people participating and countless lives touched by the effort. The media coverage of the Day of Kindness catapulted Elizabeth's story to a broader audience. She was invited to speak at local schools, sharing her journey and encouraging students to embrace kindness in their daily lives. Her talks were heartfelt and genuine, filled with practical advice and personal anecdotes that resonated deeply with her listeners. One student, a shy teenager named Lucas, approached her after one of these talks. "Ms. Elizabeth," he said hesitantly, "I don't have much to give, but I want to help people like you do. How can I start?" Elizabeth smiled warmly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Kindness doesn't have to be big to make a difference, Lucas. It starts with noticing the people around you, offering a smile, holding a door, or simply listening when someone needs to talk. The little things matter more than you know." Lucas nodded, his face lighting up with determination. A few weeks later, Elizabeth received a letter from him, sharing how he had started a kindness club at his school. The ripple effects of her message were beginning to take hold, spreading far beyond what she had ever imagined. Meanwhile, the diner continued to thrive, becoming a hub of positivity in the community. Regular customers would often leave notes of gratitude on the kindness wall, a space Elizabeth had dedicated for people to share their experiences and inspirations. These messages ranged from heartfelt thank yous to simple reminders of the goodness in the world. One day, as Elizabeth read through the notes, she came across one that stopped her in her tracks. It was from the elderly man she had helped all those months ago, the one who had unknowingly set her journey into motion. "Dear Elizabeth," the note began, "I don't know if you remember me, but I will never forget you. Your kindness on that day reminded me of the goodness that still exists in this world. Thank you for giving me hope when I needed it most." Tears filled Elizabeth's eyes as she read the words. It was a full circle moment, a reminder of how far she had come and how much had changed since that seemingly insignificant act of generosity. The diner's success and the community programs it inspired earned Elizabeth accolades she never sought but deeply appreciated. She was honored with a local leadership award, and her story was featured in a national publication, highlighting changemakers in small communities. But through it all, Elizabeth remained grounded. "It's not about the recognition," she said during one of her speeches. "It's about the lives we touch along the way. Kindness is contagious, and when we choose to lead with it, we create a ripple effect that reaches farther than we ever could alone." Her humility and authenticity continued to draw people to her cause, and the Kindness Incentive Program grew into something much larger than she had envisioned. It became a model adopted by businesses across the state, each putting their unique spin on the idea but staying true to the core principle that kindness, above all else, has the power to transform lives. As Elizabeth looked back on the journey, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunities that had come her way, but for the challenges that had shaped her into the person she was today. She often told her team that none of it would have been possible without their shared belief in the values they upheld together. And yet, Elizabeth knew her story was far from over. Her vision had expanded beyond the diner, beyond the community, to something much greater. She dreamed of creating a foundation that would empower others to carry forward the message of kindness, ensuring that its impact would continue to grow for generations to come. In the final chapter, we'll see how Elizabeth's journey comes full circle, leaving us with a powerful message about the enduring impact of kindness and the legacy we choose to create. Don't miss the emotional conclusion to this inspiring story. Elizabeth sat on the stage at a packed auditorium, her story now recognized as a movement for change. Behind her, a large screen displayed photos of the diner, smiling employees, and snapshots of the community events her initiatives had inspired. The applause was thunderous as she concluded her speech, the audience rising to their feet. But as Elizabeth soaked in the moment, her thoughts drifted back to where it all began, a simple act of kindness at a diner counter. Her journey had been filled with unexpected twists and challenges, but through it all, one truth remained clear. Kindness is a force that can overcome even the greatest adversity. What had started as a personal value had grown into a philosophy of leadership and a way of life that inspired countless others. After the event, as attendees approached her to share their admiration and gratitude, Elizabeth noticed a familiar face in the crowd. The elderly man whose meal she had paid for that fateful day stood quietly at the edge of the room. His eyes met hers, and they exchanged a knowing smile. No words were needed. The moment said everything. As she walked over to greet him, he reached out to shake her hand. "You've done so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever imagined. I'm proud to have been a small part of it." Elizabeth placed her hand over his. "It was never small," she replied. "Your story reminded me of what truly matters. I'm the one who should thank you." Their exchange was a reminder of the interconnectedness of their journeys, a testament to how one moment of compassion could create a ripple effect that changed lives. Elizabeth's impact extended far beyond her community. The Kindness Incentive Program became a national model, with businesses, schools, and nonprofits adopting its principles. Her consulting work flourished, allowing her to mentor leaders across various industries. But her proudest achievement was the establishment of the Kindness Foundation, an organization dedicated to empowering individuals and communities to create positive change through empathy and generosity. The foundation offered scholarships for underprivileged students, grants for small businesses prioritizing ethical practices, and workshops on leadership and community building. Elizabeth often participated in these workshops, sharing her story and listening to the stories of others. She believed in the power of connection, in the idea that every person had a role to play in making the world a better place. At the heart of it all was Amelia, her daughter, who had grown into a compassionate and curious young girl. Amelia often accompanied her mother to events, absorbing the lessons of kindness and resilience that Elizabeth lived every day. On one such occasion, as they drove home from a foundation event, Amelia turned to her mother and said, "Mommy, I want to be like you when I grow up." Elizabeth smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already are," she replied, "and you're going to do even greater things." As time went on, Elizabeth's story became a beacon of hope for those who felt powerless to make a difference. She showed the world that kindness wasn't just a nice idea, it was a powerful tool for change. Through her actions, she inspired others to embrace the values of empathy, integrity, and resilience, proving that even in the face of hardship, compassion could triumph. And so, Elizabeth's story continues, not as a single narrative, but as countless ripples spreading outward, carried forward by those who heard her message and chose to act. It's a story that reminds us all of the power of one small act and the potential it holds to create a legacy of love and hope. If Elizabeth's story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on how you can bring more kindness into your own life. Whether it's a simple smile, a helping hand, or a word of encouragement, remember that your actions have the power to create ripples that reach farther than you might ever imagine. Leave a comment below sharing your own story of kindness, or how you plan to make a difference today. Perhaps something like, "I believe in the power of kindness and will make it a part of my daily life." We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. By subscribing, you're joining a community that believes in creating a better world, one act of kindness at a time. And if this story resonated with you, please share it with friends and family. It could be the reminder they need to spread compassion in their own lives. Thank you for watching, and remember, the smallest act of kindness can change the world.